the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
from the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're zoning in on something a lot of New Yorkers are watching closely. The city's financial path, specifically thinking about a potential Zoran Mamdani mayoralty.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're focusing on one particular piece, an article from the Patriot Post, July 9th, 2025. It's called Betsy Coffee, Mamdani Threat Worse Than Believed.
Yep.
And, well, it definitely presents a specific viewpoint on what Mamdani might mean for NYC's finances.
Right. So our goal here is really to unpack the main arguments, the details in this article about the money side of things under a potential Mamdani administration and what it says about the safeguards, or maybe the lack of them.
Okay, let's get into it.
So what's the core worry presented in this article?
Well, the central argument really revolves around Mamdani's promised public spending. The article mentions things like universal child care, transportation, and other freebies, and it claims this would just lead to massive costs for the city.
Massive costs. And what does the article say happens then?
It lays out two pretty stark outcomes it calls disastrous. Option 1, Mamdani would have to raise New York's already high taxes.
Okay.
Option 2, his reckless spending, as the article puts it, will plunge the city into fiscal chaos. And that chaos, it warns, could mean really harsh austerity measures, things like cuts to police and even garbage collection.
Wow. Cuts to essential services. And the article mentions some outside reaction too, right? Something about Florida.
Yeah, it's an interesting side note. Apparently, a Florida trade group is actually using what they call the unacceptable risk of Mamdani becoming mayor as a pitch, basically. They're trying to get NYC CEOs to move their companies, their families, down to Florida. The article calls it doing the Mamdani math.
So, okay, if those are the predicted problems,
Yeah.
spending, potential chaos, that brings up the big question the article tackles. Are there any actual legal limits, guardrails, to stop a mayor who the article very bluntly calls a crazed socialist one from doing whatever they want financially?
That's exactly the question. And the article dives into the history of the New York State Financial Control Board, the FCB, as, the potential guardrail.
Right, the FCB, I've heard of that.
Yeah, created back in 1975. That was when the city was right on the edge of bankruptcy. Because of overspending and a bad economy, banks just wouldn't lend the city money anymore.
Okay.
So this board was set up. It has 7 members, the mayor, the governor, state and city controllers, plus 3 more picked by the governor. And according to the piece, up until 1986, this board was genuinely powerful. It controlled the budget, union deals, borrowing, the works.
Not anymore.
Well, the article says it's basically been in hibernation. But, and this is key, it's still legally there, ready to be reactivated if the city, say, spends more than it brings in or if it can't pay its debts. And the article strongly suggests those are likely scenarios under Mamdani.
Okay, so the mechanism exists. In a sense, there's a but coming.
There is a big one, according to the article. It calls it the critical hitch. You need the state legislature's consent to actually reactivate the FCB.
And the article doesn't think that'll happen.
It expresses serious doubts. It points to the state Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and Senator Michael Gianaris, both Democrats, saying they've allied with the hard left for years and actually endorse Mamdani. So the article's take is basically don't expect them to stand in Mamdani's way. It goes further, claiming that hardly any Democratic politicians in the state are willing to criticize Mamdani publicly.
And the city council.
The article is pretty dismissive there, too. It describes the council as almost entirely dominated by leftist loons and says they won't resist excessive spending either.
Strong language. Does it give any examples?
It does. It cites the recent budget negotiations where the council supposedly pushed Mayor Adams to accept what the article calls a record-setting $116 billion budget. And it characterizes that budget as bloated with services for immigrants and a pilot program for universal child care from birth.
So the takeaway from the article is that the political climate basically neuters the FCB as a safeguard.
That's the strong implication, yes. That the political alignment makes activating it highly unlikely, in their view.
Okay, so if the FCB isn't seen as a reliable check, what about taxes? The article mentioned raising taxes as one potential outcome. Is there any firewall against huge tax hikes, according to this source.
It addresses that directly. It lays out the tax increases Mamdani himself has proposed. First, bumping the city's corporate tax rate up to 11.5%. The goal there, supposedly, is to bring in $5 billion.
Okay, corporate taxes. What else?
Also, adding an extra 2% to the income tax for people earning over $1 million a year. That's aimed at collecting another $4 billion.
Right, but didn't you say earlier, or maybe the article implies, the mayor can't just do that?
Exactly. That's the constraint the article points out. Only the state legislature can impose those kinds of income and corporate tax increases. The mayor doesn't have that power unilaterally.
So Governor Hochul's position matters here then?
Very much so, according to the source. It states that Governor Hochul has said she won't sign any such hikes into law. And the article reckons that promise is probably solid until the next statewide election, which is November 2026.
But after 2026.
That's the long-term worry highlighted in the piece. It suggests that after that election, you could have a solidly blue state government, governor and legislature that would be willing to approve new taxes to fund what the article calls Mamdani's wild ideas.
Okay, so income and corporate taxes depend on Albany, at least for now.
Yeah.
But what about property taxes? The article seemed to flag that as different.
Yeah, it calls property taxes another matter and a looming threat. And you can see why it focuses there. Property taxes brought in $37 billion last year. That's huge, almost half of all the city's revenue.
Wow, nearly half.
And crucially, the mayor and the city council have much more direct control over property tax levies.
So they don't need the state legislature for that.
Largely no. And the article points out something unique about NYC. It's actually exempt from the property tax cap that applies to most other places in the state.
Exempt. So there's no limit.
Well, there are some limits.
Okay.
State law caps how much assessed property values can increase each year. 6% for big properties, 8% for smaller ones. But the article basically argues that's not enough protection against a mayor determined to spend, calling it insufficient against a cash-hungry, spendaholic mayor.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Does the article say Mamdani wants to raise property taxes?
It does. It highlights his specific proposal to increase assessments in neighborhoods he apparently calls richer and whiter. The claim reported is that property values in those areas haven't kept pace with the market.
So targeting specific neighborhoods for higher assessments.
That's what the article alleges. And it stresses that property tax hikes don't just hit building owners. They affect people in co-ops and condos and, often renters too, because landlords usually pass those costs along.
Right. It hits almost everyone eventually.
Exactly. Which leads to the article's rather sarcastic comment.
So much for Zoran's affordability blather.
And the prediction for homeowners. The article's pretty blunt. If you live in Manhattan or Brooklyn specifically, it says you should get ready to be socked with higher taxes. And it adds you might even see your home's resale value drop because of it.
So wrapping up the article's view, it sounds like it sees very few checks and balances holding up.
That's the overall conclusion, yes. It portrays NYC as a one-party city and a nearly one-party state. And in that context, it asserts there are few safeguards against the maniacal vision of Mamdani. Pretty strong language throughout.
Okay, so what does this all mean when you step back from the specifics of this one article?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? The source lays out these historical mechanisms, like the Financial Control Board, that were literally designed, put in place to prevent exactly the kind of fiscal crisis the article fears.
Right.
But then the same article argues that these safeguards have become essentially ineffective. It uses the phrase tissue paper because the political will to use them isn't there, according to their analysis.
The tool exists, but no one's willing to pick it up, potentially.
That's the argument presented. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? When you have these formal financial guardrails, these structures, what actually dictates if they work? Is it the rules themselves, or is it the political decisions, the legislative agreement needed to actually enforce those rules? It suggests the latter might be the ultimate factor.
That's definitely something to chew on. How much power do these established financial checks really have when faced with the political dynamics of the moment? A key question raised by this source material. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.